another episode of Money You Should Ask. I'm your host, Bob Wheeler, and in this episode, we're going to explore, question, examine, converse, dig deep, expose, laugh, and cry about the money beliefs, money blocks, and life choices of our next guest. Turn up the volume, listen, learn, and laugh. I'd like to thank our sponsor, The Money Nerve, a financial resource that helps you have a healthier relationship with money. Do you feel shame around your past financial decisions? Do you feel alone in your financial struggles? Do you self-sabotage your potential financial successes? Do you keep making the same choices, expecting different results? The Money Nerve has just launched a new online course called The Course to Financial Freedom. To learn more, go to themoneynerve.com/course. The Money Nerve has an offer to all Money You Should Ask listeners for a 25% discount on the course. Use code MYSA, all caps, 25, and start your course to financial freedom now. Thanks again to our sponsor. Well, I'm really pleased today to have with us Andrew Kerr from New Orleans. He is the host of House Hacking Podcast. He is a real estate investor and a successful house hacker, which we're going to find out more about. And he graduated from... Oh, okay. He didn't graduate. Okay. Oh, you actually never went. Okay. All right.
Never went. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. Sore subject. We'll talk about that. So, Andrew grew up in North Carolina mostly, but now he's down in New Orleans, where the good stuff is, and the land of jazz. And Andrew, I'm really interested about this piece about you didn't go to college, and you had this agreement with your parents that you made a deal that if you'd take a year off, and if it didn't work, that you'd go to college. So how did that all come about?
It was really all just sort of by accident. You know, in high school, I was the kid that if I liked the class, I got an A in it. If I didn't like the class, I got a D. I did just enough to get by. And I actually wanted to go to culinary school. My parents said, no, we're not going to pay for that. And sort of the way they grew up, it was, you know, you go to school, you get good grades, you go to college, and then you get a great, career. And my dad spent most of his career at Lenovo until his division got bought out by Lenovo, and that worked for him, worked for my grandfather. And I was sort of bucking the trend here, and I knew I didn't want to waste their money. They had offered to help for school. I didn't want to take on debt, and that's how I sort of just ended up. And, that took that sort of 18 to 19 off, working, and I stumbled into a job that I just started making really great money at. And then, by 20, I'd bought my first house, and all of a sudden I'm looking around at my friends that are graduating from school with a degree that they can't use, and they're working at a Sprint store after they just picked up $50,000 in debt. And it just, for me, it just didn't quite make sense at that time.
And did you, at 20, that means, maybe you got out of high school in 18, and 2 years later, you're buying a house. You're on commission, I think. So were they taking out taxes? Did you have to pay self-employment tax? Were you prepared to pay the tax?
Yeah, luckily they were taking out all of the tax for me. So, we'd get our commission checks. I think when I started, I was 19, and I started actually as one of those dreaded telemarketers.
I know them.
That was the hourly, and I'd get a bonus. And this is back in 2001, 2002. And I worked with a small shop, and the guy, I started getting so many leads from, and I liked the fact that if I got so many leads, I would get a bonus. I was a little money driven.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I realized, man, this is cool. The harder I work, the smarter I work, I get another bonus. And then all of a sudden he goes, Andrew, you should try to become a loan officer. You'll make way more money, and you're getting more leads than myself and my other person with me can handle. And then that's how I stumbled into it, was just, here I am, 19, 20 years old, making great money. I was getting ready to go rent a place. And I was like, wait, I'm doing loans for people, and I know what they're paying for a mortgage, and that's the same price or cheaper than what I could rent. So something's not right here. I should go look at buying a place. And luckily, those commission checks, when I started being a loan officer, they withheld all the taxes for it. But yeah, it blew my mind now thinking back, because when I was 20, I vividly remember when I closed on my house that February, my commission check after taxes was $12,000.
Wow.
Like, it's just an insane amount of money for a 20-year-old.
Right.
And I didn't feel like I blew it completely, but like I bought all new furniture. My girlfriend at the time, I was literally like, we'd go out to eat 4 nights a week.
Right.
And this is back, in early 2000s. You don't go out to eat all the time. And I was like, well, I still have money in my bank. Like, do you want to go out to eat again? Like, and I have another commission check coming next month.
Right.
So like the idea of saving in the future wasn't all quite there. It was just a ridiculous view of money at the time.
And how did all that shift for you? Like, did you have an epiphany one day? Did your girlfriend say, man, stop blowing through money? Did your parents make comments? Like, what led you to, I need to do this different?
It was just progression over time when, I had started a business with a friend, and it was a huge mistake. We were 2 great sales guys, and we looked at our check and we were like, why are they taking 40% of what we're bringing in? And they're sitting there doing nothing. Like, why don't we go out on our own?
Right.
And, this will make us a lot more money. So let's go open our own shop. And partly our work ethics were very different. We were great bullshitting together.
Right.
And then grabbing beers after work or going to see a hockey game on the weekend or something, but not good business partners. So that started to change. As I was starting to get to my mid-20s, I realized like, hey, is this going to be my life for the next 30, 40 years? And then, I love the guy and I hate the guy. But I read this book, which I think a lot of people know about him, Tim Ferriss, 4-Hour Work Week.
Yes.
And that just sort of blew my mind of like, wait, do I really want to spend 40 years working to spend 10 or 15 years retired?
Right.
And so it's that combination of, getting a little older, getting a little more serious in a relationship, bad choice with a business partner. And that's when it really started to shift for me.
What would be a couple of tips or things that you learned about what you would or wouldn't do going into a partnership in the future? Because I have a lot of conversations about partnerships with clients because you got to be careful about picking the right partner.
Absolutely. Some of the general rules of thumb I always think are like, a good friend doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a good business partner.
Right.
Same thing with family. Just because you're family doesn't mean you're going to do well as a business partner. And a lot of times, because you don't have that separation, you end up having work stresses carry home to the friendship and the family life. So I would always say, really think about that. And then think about complementary skill set. So maybe you're really good at accounting, but I'm not, but I'm awesome at sales. So great, I'll take care of sales and marketing. You take care of the operations and the finance. So find skills where you can complement each other in business partners. And then the one thing that we didn't do very well that I really recommend to a lot of folks, and I've done in other partnerships since then, is document everything really well, make clear expectations, and then have that in writing. So that way, if an issue does come up, you've got some footing to stand on. Luckily I was able to just walk away from that partnership. When it started to get bad, he wanted to go one way and really grow and expand. I didn't. Our work ethics weren't lining up anymore. I walked away with essentially nothing. He kept with the business. I was fortunate where I walked away with nothing. And the reason being is, I think it was about 15, 16 months later, he filed bankruptcy, specifically because that was going into 2007, 2008.
Oh, wow.
And everyone knows what happened. I wish I could say it was this beautiful, foresight that I had, but I just was able to get away at a lucky time.
So you had a lot of lucky breaks.
Yeah, very, very lucky break.
Yeah. I mean, I also think with lucky breaks, there's a lot of hard work that comes when you get lucky. And I think sometimes the universe rewards those that work hard with a little bit of extra looking out for us.
Absolutely.
So I want to jump back to the college thing. You didn't go to college because you were really looking at that. I don't want to be looking at this debt. I don't want to be working at, Starbucks or Barnes and Noble and looking at this $50,000, $100,000 debt. Did you have any real concerns that people would make judgments about your education? Do you find that most people don't even ask you about that anyway? Because if they have a sense you know how to do business, what has been the impact of that decision, and how do you?
Yeah, really great question. So part of it was just being young and dumb. You feel you're invincible and nothing can stop you. So there I was, like 20 years old, 21, and I'm like, yeah, it doesn't matter. I'm making good money. I don't need the degree. My mother, being a good mother, was like, oh, this is going to be a challenge for you when you go to interview. This is something that's always going to come up. And while it did come up in my early 20s, luckily when I was in sort of that mortgage banking and in sales, your numbers really drove the conversation.
Right.
So the fact that they could look at your track record made it easier in that sense. Especially at that time, I didn't have the degree. I was also like 22, but looked 16.
Right.
So that was even more of a challenge. So I definitely noticed it there. It was something that even still came up, when I took a job, this is probably about 6-7 years ago, the hiring manager basically said, it doesn't bother me, but my boss, when she sits down to talk with you, this is going to be a hot button issue for her. And they were recruiting me to come in. And then, the most recent job that I took, they highly recruited me to come on board, didn't even come up at once. So I think it's sort of evolved over time. They're still in the early 2000s. College was really important. And then in the past 2 years, there's really been a big shift. And, folks like Amazon, Google, and Facebook, when they started coming out saying, now having a 4-year degree isn't a requirement.
Right.
I think that started to make it more, widespread, but it still would come up every now and then.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. And did you have siblings?
I did. I was the oldest, and then was my sister, and then my brother was the youngest. So it was sort of cool the way it worked out. When I was a senior in high school, my sister was a freshman. When she was a senior in high school, my brother was a freshman. So we had this nice age gap, but it wasn't too far apart. And I was the one that was always causing my parents, the gray hair. So I think my siblings sort of learned of like, oh, Andrew's taking all the heat. He's going to make life easy for us.
No, that's probably true. And probably, to be fair, your parents weren't getting to practice on you first time tryouts, whereas with the second and third kid, they've already, oh yeah, don't do that. Look what happened to Andrew.
Yeah. Yeah.
So stay clear of that. Do you remember? No, go ahead.
I was going to say, there's this really, really interesting point, even with sort of the college and the kids, my sister went to the 4-year college. They were super proud of her. And it wasn't until at one point, sort of further in my career, my mom was always still, Andrew, have you been thinking about school? Have you been thinking about school? Being a very good mother, a little bit nagging, but being a good mother.
Yeah.
And I was building up a real estate portfolio at this. And one of her really good friends was a realtor that I was using. And literally, like, my mom changed overnight. She had a conversation with her realtor friend, and the realtor just turned to her and was like, Terry, your son owns more real estate than like 90% of the people in America. And all of a sudden, it just like snapped. She was like, oh, I have something to be proud about. Like, yeah, he doesn't have a degree, but he's a successful real estate investor. Yeah. So it was literally almost this night and day thing of like, oh, Andrew, could you buy a vacation property down in St. John? We love going to St. John. It's sort of this like fun thing. All of a sudden that changed from her point of view. So,
well, it's interesting that you brought this up, and we all love our parents. So I'm not, dogging our parents, but there is this thing about something to be proud of, right? There is this thing. I know from my parents, we need to be proud of you. You need to be a nice reflection on us. We want, and how much do you think that played a role in your growing up of with the best of intentions, but wanting something to be proud of, and right? A tangible, not just you're a good person, you have a kind heart, you take care of animals, but you've got something to be proud of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that played in 100%. I was really fortunate. Grew up in a very middle-class life. Both my parents, loving relationship. I don't ever even remember them fighting. My mom said they would fight like a normal couple did all the time. I don't even really remember that. But part of it was just a generational thing. I'm now 38. I'm at that sort of a millennial, right at that edge. But, when they grew up, my grandfather worked his way all the way up at GM and had a degree. My dad, as soon as he got out of high school, went to Michigan State, got a great degree in engineering. That sort of worked for them. But then all of a sudden in the 90s, as sort of tech started coming around, and then the early 2000s, the world really, really changed. And I think that changed a lot of people's perspectives. But, with my parents, that's very much what it was. It's here's what worked for us, and this is going to work for you.
Right.
And the world, while it was very different from the 90s to the 70s or even the 60s, in some ways it hadn't changed a whole lot. It's, you get good grades in school so you can go to a good college, then you can go work for a good company, and then you stay with that company for your whole career, and then they take care of you. And a lot of folks really know what happened with companies is they started doing away with those pensions, retirement plans, shifting to 401ks, downsizing very randomly. And so some of that sort of changed their perspective as well. And, I grew up in that where stuff was rapidly shifting. So to me, it didn't make sense of going and working at a career for 30 or 40 years that you didn't like anymore.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. I feel very fortunate that I love what I do. And I know people that hate what they do and they go and do it every day for a number of years. That's incredibly depressing to me. I could not get up. And in fact, I had a job. I would get up towards the end. And as I'm driving over the hill, it was in the valley, I'd be crying. Because I'm like, I don't want to go, and then I'd get to work and I'd get through the day. And after about 3 weeks, I just said, well, I don't have a plan other than I'm not driving to this place anymore. And I quit. And, they were shocked. Well, I didn't know what I was going to do, but I was so miserable. And I know a lot of people will suppress that misery and get the paycheck. It took me a while to recover from that choice. And I don't regret it at all.
Yeah, I give a lot of credit to my dad. I know he didn't always love his job. Sometimes he did, and he moved up through the ranks. He never made it to sort of the C-suite level, but was sort of that upper level management. And I definitely know there's weeks and months and years when he rather would have just quit. But it was, here's what I need to do to take care of my family. So I'm going to grind it through. So I definitely give him a lot of credit for that. But I could never do it. I always find myself like, that's why me and my one buddy, part of why we went out and started a company was, they were taking a ton of our commission check, but all of a sudden it was like, wait, he's asking us, the top producers, for a pipeline report? Please, we're making him so much money. Right. Like, all right, fine. I'm pissed off. I'm going to go start my own company.
Right.
Like that flexibility just wasn't necessarily there in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s.
Yeah. No, absolutely. When you were growing up, what were the messages around money that you received? And were they the same from both parents?
Generally, yeah. And I mean, part of it was we didn't really have a lot of money. My dad was raised in the Catholic Church. We were raised in the Catholic Church. We were essentially required to go up till 16. And part of what we always taught, even when we started to get our little allowances, you tithe, you give back, you got to give something. So that was really the biggest money message that we sort of learned growing up. And, I didn't really have a concept of the money. We lived in a nice house. The only time I ever went hungry was when we were being bratty and we didn't want to eat what mom cooked or dad cooked. And, my dad was somewhat frugal. We'd ask sometimes of like, well, why are you changing, the oil on your truck yourself? And he's like, well, it's cheaper. You got to learn how to take care of your stuff. That was really the big thing we learned is you take care of your stuff so it lasts, not necessarily of how to do a budget or how to save for retirement. I remember when I got my first part-time job at 15, my dad took me down to the credit union and helped me open up a IRA, individual retirement account. And back then you couldn't choose really to invest in stocks. It was great. You give them this, they give you a guaranteed 4% rate of return, per year while the money's invested with them. There's really no choices.
Right.
You couldn't take your money a lot of other places. And, those were the basic things that I really learned of tithe, take care of stuff so it'll last. And then the early concepts of sort of saving for retirement. But, at 15, 16, it doesn't make sense. All it was is dad's making me take money out of my check that I want to go blow on video games,
right.
And, going out with friends.
How much do you still tithe? And do you personally, if you do tithe, do you do it because that's what your parents told you, or do you see a value in tithing or charity?
100%. So we hadn't quite touched on this yet, but back in 2008, when the sort of world was falling apart financially, I was sort of making this change in my career and ended up in the nonprofit sector. Along the same time period, I had joined a Rotary Club. A lot of folks are familiar with the Rotary Club from maybe their grandfather was in it.
Yep.
I joined for networking, but they sort of instilled in, you got to volunteer locally. We got to volunteer internationally, do service projects. So that started to instill some stuff in me. And I realized how, I remember the first time I went to Haiti. I'd been abroad a bit in like Europe and Italy, to the Caribbean, but it was always the tourist areas.
Right.
And I spent some time in Haiti, and I came back, and my buddy in Miami picked me up, and we went through the drive-through. And having been on rice and beans for a month, I was like, oh, give me the burger, give me the fries, give me the chicken nuggets, give me the milkshake,
right,
give me the Coke, the Dr. Pepper. And it was like $20, and it was nothing. Then all of a sudden I was like, man, I just spent on one meal what they were living off of for a whole month.
Right.
So that just really started to instill in me. So, we give every month. There's a couple big charities I'd love to support. We give monthly reoccurring. And then as time goes throughout the year, when we sell a property or we end up with a little extra cash, we like to give to a charity of our choice. And then one of my sort of personal missions is to raise $25 million for charity. So I've raised about $18 million, give or take. I got to update my numbers here in 2020. But, I realized when I started doing some nonprofit work back in 2008 was I could go out and clean out these flooded homes. I could swing a hammer, but anyone could come behind me and sort of do that job. I was really good at, from being 100% commission, relationship building, the sales side of it.
Yeah.
So I said, my time is more valuable going out and fundraising, which a lot of people didn't like to do.
Right.
And I can make a bigger impact charity that way. So I'm slowly moving towards that goal of raising $25 million for charity. And then we do give every year. And, as an accountant, I know you're familiar with donor advised funds. So we're looking at setting up one here in the spring when we sold a property we had been working on. But with COVID happening, I think we're going to wait till next year if we end up selling that property. And then we'll set up a donor advised fund. That way we can sort of think about more generational charity and giving and try to get our nieces and nephews sort of clued in on charitable giving as well.
I love that. I'm a big believer in paying it forward and volunteerism and community service and donating. What are the benefits that you personally have received in doing charity work, in doing nonprofit, in volunteering, in raising that money?
I mean, it's very selfish in some ways, where like you almost feel like you get more out of it. I mean, I write about this on my blog. There's a little section on there where, I went from making a 6-figure income in mortgage banking to, my starting salary was actually a stipend in the nonprofit sector was $800 a month. I made tons of great money, but hated life. And then all of a sudden I was making no money, but I loved life. Mm-hmm. So, there's that side of it. You definitely feel good about having a purpose, about giving back. It completely opened up my worldview. Also, so the charity work that I started doing was a disaster response work. It had taken me all around the world. Now me and my wife, I've been to about 34, 35 countries. She's been to over 40 countries.
Nice.
It really changed our worldview. We've got friends all around the world. Sort of a fun, crazy story. I was doing aid work in Indonesia. I met a woman from Italy, and she went to boarding school for high school in Canada, got her degree at the London School of Behavioral Science and Health Sciences, and she was doing aid work in Indonesia. I got deployed to Haiti. She got deployed to Haiti, different organizations, and our field bases were right next to each other. We became fast friends. My wife and I went to her wedding 2 years ago in Italy. We were supposed to go see them this fall in Switzerland, where she's living now with her husband. And that's just like one of these amazing things where, like, to me, it's given so much. It makes me feel better about life. It's built friendships. It's changed my worldview. It's also, the biggest thing is made me more grateful for what I have and what I'm at. In my early 20s, I was definitely way more materialistic. Like, I gotta fly private. That's what I want to work towards, is being uber multimillionaire so I can have a private jet. And then I was like, I actually really don't need that. Like, flying business class is good enough for me. Let's do that. And like, do I really need the fancy car? Yes, it'd be nice. But like, in New Orleans now, I have a little Fiat that I've had for years. And it's like, I don't have a garage. I don't, even pre-COVID, I would maybe drive 20 miles a month, because like we could walk everywhere or take a quick Uber out. So it's things like that, that helped shift my perspective on what do I actually value in life. And to me, it's more of those experiences and time with family and friends. So to me, that charity, giving back, is really just changed my overall perspective on a lot of things.
You touched on something that feels important for me anyway. I've traveled a lot, and I agree it can change one's worldview. I certainly have gone to a lot of developing countries, and the word that you talked about, which was for me the same thing, it was transformational, is coming from a place of gratitude.
Yeah.
Like, I think, yes, being somewhat entitled and having in the U.S., we have it really, really good. Maybe we don't think so. We have it really, really good. We can go into grocery stores and have, cell phones, but there's something in seeing how other people live that for me was very humbling, and really shifted my whole mindset about gratitude. So can you just say a little bit more about that for you, how it changed your worldview, and what would you say about traveling, if people should do it or not do it?
Absolutely. So funny story, you'd mentioned with the grocery store, back when I had joined a Rotary Club early on, we had an exchange student come over, and I think he was from Pakistan, in a more rural area. And one of the guys in my Rotary Club took him to the grocery store to just buy a couple of essentials. And the guy just stopped and was just looking around and like didn't know what to do. And the part that he got stuck on was the butter section. And to us, like, what type of butter you want. You walk in, but to him, it was like, butter's butter. And it's like, in our grocery store, it's like, we got butter with canola oil, we got whipped, we've got salted, we got unsalted, we got margarines. And like, there's 50 different varieties. It was just so overwhelming from them. And to me, that's what traveling internationally has done, is changed that perspective of like, everyone's going to have a bad day from time to time. But when you sort of put things in that perspective of like, man, my day isn't really that bad. Our welfare system, our social safety nets are so much better than around the world. When we did work in Haiti, one of the things that would drive us crazy is, besides the whole island time thing when no one's ever on time, but in every meeting, everyone would always answer their phone in the middle of the meeting, no matter what. And one time we just asked, we're like, well, why do you always interrupt? In our country, it'd be very rude if you're in an important business meeting and all of a sudden you just answer the phone. And he goes, well, you're America. You have 911. We don't have 911. So if someone calls, it could actually be an emergency. And if it's my wife, my children in an emergency, I need to answer and then leave right away. And to me, that was just one of those other huge perspectives of when you learn how other people live around the world, and it makes you so much more grateful. And then the other piece there too is how they can live their life so much simpler and be so much happier than us with all of our junk that we have. So those are the couple of pieces. The other thing is, even if traveling internationally isn't your thing, you got to get out of your own state, travel to a different state. I mean, we're in such an amazing country that's so diverse geographically, mountains, beaches, cornfields. It's an amazing thing. And I think the more you travel, it helps open up your viewpoint. When you can understand how different people live, even in the U.S. or around the world, it just gives you a different perspective. I'm really big on traveling internationally simply because, our country is only 300 years old.
Yeah.
And while there is some history here, I mean, it's completely different than, walking through Rome and seeing something that's 500, 1,000 years old. Yeah. Or, last year we did a huge Middle East trip, seeing the pyramids that have been there for, centuries upon centuries. Yeah. To me, it just makes you think a little bit differently. Even if you go abroad and you're like, nope, not for me, it all of a sudden make you say like, it's pretty nice having that McDonald's right down the road for me, or the Starbucks that I can go through the drive-through, or, Uber Eats on my phone. And I have all these choices. So yeah, me and my wife, we actually have this goal of trying to join the Traveler Century Club. So you actually have to travel to and stay in 100 countries before you can join. So every year we try to go to another 2, 3, 4 countries.
Oh, that's cool. That's a good goal.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love traveling. How much do you and your wife talk about money?
More and more now. So, part of it was we had dated for several years before we got married. We got married, September will be 2 years.
Okay.
And even before that, we were getting quite serious. It wasn't me. So if any women are listening and you think you're blaming me, she was actually the one's like, no, I just want to be together. We don't have to get married. So it wasn't me waiting off on
I was going to say to you, wow, she's a very patient woman.
Yeah. No.
It's her fault.
But even before we had gotten married, we were like, great, we're going to be together. We had put estate plans in place. I did a healthcare directive. That way, if something happened to me, she could be there and actually be in the room with me if I was unconscious. I wrote that sort of in conjunction with my parents and feedback and saying, look, yes, while we're technically not married, like she's a big part of my life.
Right.
I put a life insurance plan in place for her, stuff that you normally do once you get married. So we started talking a little bit about then. And then once we really started and she sort of changed her mind at one point, said, look, and this is when we got to New Orleans. Okay, I definitely want to get married. Let's start thinking about that. Not a huge rush. I don't want a big wedding. Let's start to think about these pieces. That really started driving the conversation for us. And the two big things that really drove it forward, one was a wedding, and then two was buying property together. So on that wedding piece, she didn't want a big wedding, and she realized like the average cost of a wedding was like $25,000, $30,000. She was just blown away by that. And she's like, that is so crazy. Like for 30 grand, we can go travel around the world for 6 months.
Yeah.
Or like we can go live in Asia for a year and have an awesome condo, have a cleaner that comes every day, just live an amazing life. So that sort of really started getting us talking about money. And then real estate was always my thing, and she sort of understood it, but she liked the fact that I was ambitious. And I proposed this idea to her of like, why don't we do a house hack together? Because if we can do a house hack and we have zero housing costs, think how much money that would free up. And when we moved to New Orleans, we were renting a place. It was costing us $1,400, $1,500 a month. So I proposed to her of like, if we can do a house hack and buy this property together, you take some of your savings, I take some of mine, then, $1,500 a month, 20 grand a year. That's some pretty cool international trips. So that really dawned on her. But then as we started going through renovations, we started looking at picking out tile. Like I would automatically walk to the $2 a foot tile section.
Yeah.
She'd walk around to see what looked nice. And she's like, oh, I love this one. And I was like, that's $20 a square foot. So that started having more money conversations for us. And then when we started managing the property together, that sort of like, oh, we've got this budget. And that really, we're still not perfect by any means, but that sort of helped us have more money conversations of, hey, we're managing this joint project together. We've got to put money aside for maintenance. We got to start thinking about the future. She had an idea what a savings goal was. I had one. And then when we started talking through that, so that's sort of how things started to develop for then.
Okay. Now, I know we're going to have you as a guest on the Money Nerve podcast, and you're going to talk about house hacking, but can you just give a short description for people that don't know what house hacking is?
Yeah. The basic concept is it's sort of a real estate investing niche. So the idea is you just make a slightly different choice with your housing. And you do that to help offset or eliminate some or all of your housing costs. So most folks in the US spend on average 30 to 40% of their income on housing. So the idea with house hacking is, let me buy a property that has some sort of income potential. So whether it's like a duplex and you rent out one side and it helps offset part of your mortgage, or you're just out of college and you've been living with friends, you go buy a big 5-bedroom house, rent out the other 4 bedrooms to your friends, and all of a sudden they're covering your whole mortgage and you're pocketing a little bit of money. So that's just the basic ideas. You make a slightly different choice to buy a house that can have some income potential to sort of close that gap. Instead of spending 30 or 40% of your housing or your budget on housing, you're cutting it to 20, 10%, or in some really good cases, 0% of your income on housing.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I have a lot of entertainment clients. And so when actors get ready to buy their first house, they're like, I want to buy a house. And I always say, you should consider a duplex or a triplex. So when your TV show gets canceled, if it does, heaven forbid, you've got other people paying your mortgage. Because the couple clients that I had that went out and bought a house and then lost the series end up selling their house. And a lot of my clients have started out with a duplex or a triplex. And even though initially they were, Bob, I don't want to do this, they've come back and said, oh my God, it helped me step up to the next house, or it helped me step up.
And that's what I presented to my wife when we did that house hack. I said, this helps us get in a better position to buy the next one, which helps us get a step closer to your dream house.
Right.
Or if we want to go live abroad for a year or two, they're producing cash flow that covers our housing when we're abroad. But yeah, that's brilliant that you take your entertainment clients on that, because they could be making killer money and then that series gets canceled. Or maybe they get a new job, but it's for only 6 months in another part of the country. So now you got to rent your house short term, or if you have that duplex, you can afford to just leave it as is because you're offsetting some of that cost.
Exactly. All right. What do you love to spend money on and you don't actually feel guilty about and you just spend it?
Oh, yeah. Again, generally frugal, but I love good dress shoes. So,
okay.
This is, Tim Ferriss, damn him, right? So there's so many things he changed my perspective on. There's this really great quote that he had is like, you spend most of your life on your feet or in your bed. So spend a good money on a mattress and spend good money on shoes. And so that I use as this rationale, but I love good, real Italian dress shoes.
Okay.
The good part is, like my wife, she doesn't think it's that crazy, but some of my friends are like, you just spent $400 on a pair of dress shoes? I was like, yes, but the other pair that I bought 7 years ago, they still look brand new. You can get them resold and refurbished. So that's one of the things I'll blow money on, a nice pair of dress shoes.
That's awesome. I'm incredibly frugal. My friends would say cheap, but I like frugal. It sounds better.
Yeah.
What do you not want to spend money on? What do you, and besides taxes? Because
taxes. I think that one upsets everyone.
I think it does.
I mean, lately it's really just shifted. Part of COVID is I think for a lot of folks, it's shifted their perspective on a lot of things. The thing that I hate is takeout food from your average restaurant. So like I'll end up ordering Uber Eats and I'm like, that was an average meal at best. We could have made something just as good. So that's something that I always like. It seems great. It's like, oh, we're in a hurry, or like we're busy. We hadn't gone to the grocery store yet. Let's just order some Uber Eats or DoorDash. And then afterwards, like, man, that was a waste of like $40 after you add in the delivery fee and the tip and the food that was mediocre at best. And don't get me wrong, like when we travel, we always pick out a Michelin star restaurant to go to.
Yeah.
But to us, that is more of an experience.
Right.
A dining experience, a tasting experience versus I need substance. Let me go spend money on takeout. So that's something that we still do. And then afterwards always just drives us crazy of like, did we really just spend $100 this week on Uber Eats? That was a waste.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, I'm going to ask you this one final question. What advice would you give to a younger version of yourself? If you could go back and talk to the 18-year-old you about life, about finances, what would you tell him?
Yeah, I would say two things. One is max out those retirement accounts early. I didn't really do that. I had mentioned my dad helped me set up that IRA at 15. I think I ended up cashing it out at one point and started another and cashed one out and started another. So, even if I would have just put away, 5% of what I was making, I was blowing it all, so I wouldn't have missed it. It would have made a huge impact to my net worth.
Yep.
And then the other thing is, I bought that first property and did a house hack and rented out the rooms, but I didn't grasp that concept. I really wish I would have bought another property a lot sooner. If I would have picked up 2 or 3 extra properties there, in those early 2000s, could have made a huge difference financially. So diversify and, max out those tax deferred retirement accounts is really what I would say to my 18-year-old self.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree. So I know we're coming to the end here, and I just want to reflect back. What I've really been hearing, what I'm taking away is that, do what you love. Really actually check in. You didn't go to school because it was like the thing to do. You checked in and said, I don't want the debt. I'm not sure I'm going to like it. And it sounded like, and it sounds like you're open and flexible to reevaluate things rather than just say, this is the way it is, and I'm going to do this for the next 30 years, but some openness to actually readjust. And I love this piece about traveling because I do think it teaches us to, it taught me to be a lot more humble and a lot more grateful. And I do think it opens our eyes. And I really hear this place about charity, that it's almost a little selfish because you do get more from it when you give. And I tend to agree with that. I do feel like it's an important component of being human is to pay it forward. So it's really cool to hear that you have a goal that you're close to getting of raising $25 million. For charity. I think that's brilliant and awesome. And I hope you get there sooner than later. And where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, so 2 Instagram or sort of Facebook social media handles are The House Hacking Podcast is my podcast that I put on to help folks that want to learn about that real estate investing niche. And then all my other handles are FIBYREI, FIBYREI. I'm sort of talking about getting to some level of financial independence through, real estate investing. Well,
people should look you up. That's Andrew Kerr, Kerr, and look up house hacking so that you can learn how to get ahead if that's been something you want to do. And I'm sure you have some tips in there for people that maybe they don't have 30% to put down on a rental, or maybe there are other ways to get creative if you don't have necessarily the 20 or 30% down. I know there are opportunities if you look. But I think people should check that out, and it's worked for you, and I'd love for people to check that out. Let me shout out to FinCon because we did meet connected through FinCon. I love FinCon. It's a great organization that connects folks with other folks that want to talk and share and educate and learn about finances and debt and everything in between and house hacking. And so I appreciate that FinCon creates that space for all of us to come together and support each other and learn from each other. And so I appreciate you bringing your gifts and your experiences out there for people to learn about. So thank you for that. And I also want to say, don't forget to share the love. For those of you listening to Money You Should Ask podcast, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Search for Money You Should Ask, all one word. And you can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast player. And Andrew, it has been awesome having you, and I appreciate you taking the time, and I wish you much, much more success and gratitude and abundance. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. It was great chatting with you.
Yeah. Thank you.